guests today are Alan Novak, previously serving as chair of the Republican State Committee during the Ridge administration. Also with us, TJ Rooney, previously served as chair with the Democratic State Committee during the Rendell administration. Both of them represent the firm Rooney Novak Isenhour Group. TJ, we'll start with you. On Sunday, President Joe Biden announced his withdrawal from the presidential race. What was your immediate reaction?
My immediate reaction was I was glad for him. You know, if there's a metaphorical weight to the world to be lifted off your shoulders, he probably did on Sunday, and good for him. He's an amazing person I've been blessed to know for quite some time. So I've always wished him nothing but the best, and I think that was a great decision on his part. Not only for the politics of the nation, but for himself, he and his family. And so that's the first thing I thought. It was that good for him. I hope he gets to enjoy his the few precious days we all have left.
Alan, what was your reaction to the president's withdrawal?
I was a little surprised that it happened on Sunday, but not surprised that it happened. And like TJ, you sometimes take yourself out of the competitiveness of the sport of politics and just look at the human side. And I felt bad for him. And this isn't going to be a dump on the Democrats or anything like that. I just felt bad for him that, this thing played out with so much public pressure on him coming from so many different sources. And I don't think anybody wants to ever experience that. And, I'm going to set aside whether he should or he shouldn't, but I just felt bad for him.
How do you think this will affect the president's legacy?
Well, it's not a good end. And he's got a legacy of public service. We agree with him or disagree with him on policy. Man served the country for a long time in a lot of different ways. And I'm always told if you had a beer with the guy, you'd really like him. And so it's just not the way you want to see it end.
TJ, your thoughts?
No, I've had a vodka with him, and I love him. He's every bit as good a guy as you might think if you're objective enough. Think him to be. He's a good man. He cares about his country. He cares about his family. And he cares about his politics and his party. I think he's going to leave a tremendously good legacy. I think it would have been far more ignominious of him to go out in a resounding defeat. And there's nothing he could have done to undo that scenario. I mean, unless he's got the Benjamin Button thing and can wind back time, there's nothing he wasn't able to take a correct. A lot of times in politics, if there's a gaffe that's committed or something that's viewed as a fatal flaw, you can take action to correct it. You can ignore it. You can pretend it went away. You can face it head on. There's a million things. But when you're aging, there's nothing you can do. So every misstep would have been magnified to the umpteenth degree. He did what was right for the country. He did what was right for our party. And ultimately, he will, hopefully, once it sinks in, he will realize he did what's right for himself. But I'm not trying to, I've got no medical degree. I'm not in the man's head, but he's a good guy. And I have got, over the years, gotten to hang with him a little bit. And he's just a decent bloke who deserves all the good that's going to come his way.
Do you think that President Biden's performance in the June 27th debate was to blame for his withdrawal, or were there other indications that he might potentially be pulling back prior to that?
No, that was the tipping point. That was what caught a lot of us. When you have the opportunity to do what we're doing right now with some regularity, you really do rely and trust those people, that you talk to be able to form an opinion, to be able to share it with good people like yourself, Francine, and your viewers. And for the last, better part of the year, the people that I know and trust were all saying the same thing. And that was, he's getting older and it shows in public, but in private, he's sharp as a tack. I think that moment in time crystallized it for a lot of it, even those of us who were hoping it wasn't the case. It became very clear. In hindsight, I had people say to me, well, no kidding. This is what we've been saying for the last 6 months. I refused to see it. It became glaringly evident that night, and it broke my heart in pieces.
How do you think President Biden's withdrawal changes the tone or the focus of the presidential race?
Well, I'll I want to pivot off of something TJ said. The debate was the beginning. TJ and I are big sports fans, so we talk in sports analogies a lot. And the way I saw it, the first game of a 3-week losing streak started on the debate. And then every effort to go out and win a game and stop the losing streak failed. And the losing streak continued until I think Sunday, Monday. And what I see now is the Democrats are on a 3-week losing streak. And the Republicans actually had some momentum and some wins along that period of time. So it wasn't as if one side was going down and another side was static. The other side was moving up. So I think this is a pause. This stops the losing for today, tomorrow, maybe for a couple more days, and then we'll see. But in a season that's long and there's only about 20% of it left, it was important that Democrats had to stop losing every single day. And even if it wasn't the president himself, it was all of this stuff descending on him that was continuing that losing.
I view it a little bit differently, Francine, in the sense that I was in Harrisburg with Alan a couple of weeks ago, and we had the good fortune to meet with many of the leaders of the Republican-led state Senate, all good people to a person. And we talked about a myriad of things during our time together. They were individual slots of time that we were afforded with each of them. And the political takeaway that I came away with was that they were far, far, far more energized than they had been about this upcoming election, than any election they had been enthusiastic about since 2016. And that really struck me. To a person, they weren't overconfident. They weren't, measuring up drapes before any elections were held, but they were more enthusiastic and optimistic. And that showed. And when when I was able to think on it, it made a lot of sense. We weren't the party with enthusiasm as we've been since 2017. We've had the wind at our back. We've been the aggressors. We've been on the offense. And now that was changing. Kamala Harris's entry into the race flips that script. It changes that dynamic. It gives heft and enthusiasm and wind to the sails of the Democratic effort going into the fall. Much needed heft, wind, and enthusiasm, what we were sorely lacking. So I view it in that with that prism, and I think it will prove to be a very profound. And you know what? I still think the presidential race, Francine, is tight as a tick. But where it's really, I think, going to be felt, and those people who will be most benefited, those men and women, will be the down ballot races. I think Bob Casey is given energy. The whole ticket from the State House to the White House. You're going to see people with a different kind of approach to this campaign than we had maybe a week ago.
Yeah, I agree with TJ, Francine, on that point, that the enthusiasm gap during the past month or two, but especially over the last 3 weeks, was really separating in favor of the Republicans. And I do think that changes now with Vice President Harris on the ticket. I spoke to some Democrat women in Chester County and some kind of moderate Republican women in Chester County. And they believe that this changes the momentum a bit. I don't know that anybody's willing to say today what that means for Pennsylvania in November. But I do agree with TJ that the enthusiasm gap, that separation had to stop, or this election was going to be over by the time early voting started. And I think that enthusiasm gap, at least where we are today, has stopped.
Is there enough time to build momentum for an alternate candidate?
A third party candidate?
Well, whether the presumptive nominee ultimately ends up being Kamala Harris or somebody else.
No, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Of course, listen, I'll be perfectly honest with you by saying I'm very surprised at how quickly. Now, to the credit of the vice president, nothing happens by accident in politics. It came together for her very quickly. I would have thought perhaps it wouldn't, maybe that's the eventual outcome. I thought we might have taken some time to chop it over a little bit. Because at the end of the day, after throwing the incumbent president seeking reelection under the bus, the thing that matters most to me, and I think most Democrats, is that we win. Like if we're gonna go through all of this and turn everything upside down, at the end of the day, we better damn well win. And I thought we would chop that up a little more. I thought we'd talk about it, but again, Democrats like to talk. I understand this probably makes more sense, but I'm getting old and sentimental, I guess. I just thought circumstances would have demanded. Maybe we come to the same place at the end of 3 days. Maybe not, but we'll never know. As that famous rap artist once said, we'll never know.
How important is it to present a united front before the Democratic National Convention actually occurs?
Oh, I think, especially heading into a fight with Trump, it's very, very important. We need all the oars in the water rowing in the same direction. I hate those metaphors. But yes, it's very, very important that Democrats be together. And that hasn't, it's not as if we haven't been a little bit disjointed in the past. When I was fortunate to work with Governor Rendell, we presided over a Democratic delegation in 2008, half of whom wanted to vote for Hillary Clinton, not Barack Obama. So it helps. I can tell you that I would much rather be on this side of the equation than on the equation of 2008.
I'll pose this to both of you. Is it problematic if there's an impression or perception of Kamala Harris being anointed her candidacy?
I think that's a Democrat issue to work out. And that works out in terms of the enthusiasm factor too, because it was clear that my Democrat friends were telling me that the concern about turnout was enormous with President Biden at the top of the ticket. So now that he's not, and now that Vice President Harris presumably is going to be, this looks like this is coming together very, very fast, as TJ said. Probably about the only prominent Democrat that hasn't did an endorsement is President Obama, and I think he's going to wait and we'll see what all the other leaders and the rank and file Congress members do. So I think, look, I just witnessed a convention that I thought was pretty good and pretty effective. And I'm not putting on a cheerleader uniform here. I actually thought it was a good convention, as good as I've ever seen. I've been to 4 and helped plan one. And I thought the messaging was good. The energy was good. The images on television were good. But the only thing that wasn't great was I think the president missed the opportunity, or the former president missed the opportunity to close the deal in his final speech. I think he started off the right way, started rambling, got back. And I don't know how many people that were on the fence still on the fence after that. We'll see. But I think it's real important that the Democrats go in unified so they can put on a convention that looks unified.
Yeah, at the end of the day, what matters are, I think the numbers like 38, 97, and 739. Those are the numbers of elected delegates and superdelegates. And if you base the party's desire to embrace the vice president on just what we've seen in just over 24 hours, it's amazing. Not only elected officials in their own right, but delegates individually and collectively. I know, Francine, you're going to have on Chairman Street in a little bit, and I know my friend Sharif Street knows how to count. He's calling a meeting later on, as I understand it, to have the delegation unanimously embrace Vice President Harris's nomination for president, as did the North Carolina Democratic Party. And it's not the Democratic parties, it's the delegates that are getting together. The issue in North Carolina last night, they were just calling to give them a briefing on everything, and it sort of like broke out. It just said, we want to do this now. This is what we want to do. We want to do it now. So I think it has generated tremendous enthusiasm, unanimity. I do get a kick out of it when folks say, well, somebody still could emerge. Yeah, if you have a gaping head, that would probably be a great idea if you were to emerge and try to upset this apple cart. Whether or not we should have chopped it over a little bit, it matters not anymore. This is where we are. This is where the delegates are. And we will be a united party, something that I think an enthusiastic party, we're not just going through the motions as perhaps some folks were prior to yesterday. Everybody understands that the dynamics are what they are, and there's nothing going to be left on the table. So everybody's all in.
Alan, is it problematic that President Biden withdrew after the primary election? Is there any anticipation of national Republicans filing a legal challenge to that?
I don't know. I'll leave that to legal, the legal beagles, the party, people that look at that kind of thing. I look, it's ironic that democracy was the big thing that the Democrats were throwing at Trump, and now that's going to be the thing that we throw right back at them. A whole bunch of delegates and a whole bunch of people that voted in all these primaries. But if the delegates want this, that's it. If the delegates want this, that's it. I mean, that's the representative of all those voters. Those are the representatives of all those voters at the convention. So, yeah, we'll play the games with the democracy card and issue, but this is coming together very fast. And I think it's going to have an impact in the race. I don't know if it'll change the outcome, but I think it changes the dynamic of the race. And what it says to me is there were a lot more people than were out there publicly calling for President Biden to step aside. There were a lot more people that wanted that inside the Democrat Party. Probably 4 times the number of members of Congress that didn't say it wanted it. And then there were other people that said it. Likewise with the Senate, because this is coming together so fast. It's almost like, finally, now let's get to what we want to do.
TJ, what should our viewers know about presumptive nominee Kamala Harris's views and leadership style?
So she was, I think, most impressively and most importantly, Francine, for this race going forward, she was the Attorney General of the state of California, which is in no measure any small feat. So, ironically, the rap, if you will, the knock on Vice President Harris used to be that she was a little too law enforcement oriented and centered. That's not going to be, that's not going to be a thing that's going to be a detriment to her in this race. And again, I hate to just beat the obvious drums, but you asked the question and it relates to my answer, is that when you do have a candidate with as many felony convictions as the president has, having the contrast between a white man and a woman of color, having that between a convicted felon and a prosecutor, are all things that sort of, I think, where she'll fare exceedingly well in prosecuting. Because at the end of the day, Francine, we have to be honest. This isn't necessarily about winning hearts and minds over exclusively so that everybody loves Kamala Harris. She is going to be in a far, far superior position to make the case of why Donald Trump is unfit for office. You can look at it as a glass half empty, a glass half full. You can look at it as a glass out the window. It doesn't matter. It is what it is. So I think she is going to do an exceptional job, as good a job, if not better job, than any of the other people or names that were bandied about. I don't think that the former president wants to do another debate, for example, with her. I think he understands that the outcome of that debate would be very, very much different. I think she brings those strengths. She brings the strength of the Biden record, and there are lots of strengths in that. And it's funny because I see some people and hear some people criticizing the Biden administration, but when the opportunity comes around for them to show up and shake hands and get their picture taken for the money that's being invested in their community, they're like Cheshire cats. So we can argue about the record, but she's going to be a staunch defender of it. There's a lot of stuff in that record she can be proud of, both in her service as AG and certainly in the United States Senate, where she has began to acquire some foreign policy experience to where she is today, the nominee of our party. So we can all be quite proud of the impressive resume she brings to the job of president.
Alan, what kind of challenger do you see Kamala Harris to President Trump?
Foundation of my answer would be everything TJ just said. I disagree on the policy. I think the issue of inflation is still out there. The issue of gas prices, food prices, the world stage and the wars in the different spots, that's all out there. But understand this election's about very few people. 90% of the people who are going to vote know how they're voting. Maybe more. Maybe this is about 4 or 5% of the people that are open to voting for one or the other. And that's what this battle is going to be about. And I think Biden on the ticket was a losing proposition with a majority of that small group of people. And I think Vice President Harris on the ticket puts them in play, gives them a new factor to consider. I never underestimate Democrats. They play to win always. I mean, she was not a good candidate for president, but she's going to have a support mechanism now like she's never had before. She's going to have a platform, and she's going to have a media, and she's going to have a lot of people that don't want to see Donald Trump win helping her. It's going to come down to her performance, but I think this resets. It's kind of like you're going in and you're going into the next game of the next to last game of the playoffs, and you assume I'm going to get to the Super Bowl and I'm going to play that team. And then it's not that team. It's a different team. And that's what this just did to this race. I'm not saying it won it for the Democrats. I'm not saying Trump's got it won. I'm saying this is now a new and different game.
Could one of you address the campaign finance aspect of this? Does Kamala Harris have, does she benefit from access to President Biden's campaign donations in a way that perhaps other Democratic candidates would not be able to do so?
Oh, yes, very much so. As I understand it, they've already made the change from Biden-Harris to Harris for president. So with that change, I would imagine comes something upwards of $100 million. Different groups raised another. Yes, the one thing that I think is clear to everybody I don't care, again, from the State House to the White House, money in targeted races isn't going to be an issue this year. It's not going to be an issue in the presidency. It's not going to be an issue in the United States Senate races, governor's races across the country, and certainly races for Congress and State House and State Senate. Money is not going to be the thing that decides elections in this cycle. It's going to be something that I think we just got a lot of it back, and that is intensity and enthusiasm. Like Alan said, I don't disagree with him at all that, it doesn't mean we're going to win Pennsylvania, but it gives us a much better chance, and it gives those people who aren't running for president, who are also on the ballot, a much better chance that they'll prevail, because there's not going to be a diminished sort of wet blanket among the enthusiasm of Democrats. It's sort of reinvigorated.
I mean, we were all hearing stories about the Democrat donor money drying up. And I don't think it's coincidence that within a day of President Biden stepping out of the race, and within the well-sourced reports that Vice President Harris was on the phone with donors, the $50 million is coming in. Now, there were a lot of people probably talking to a lot of smart Democrats like former Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer and others, the top tier of the Democrat leadership, saying, hold your powder, don't walk away. If we pull this off, we need this money to come in quick. That's kind of my conspiratorial view of it. But I can't ignore that fact that within a day of this, suddenly the money problem doesn't look as much like the money problem.
I'd like to shift our focus a little bit. Roughly about 9 or 10 days ago, just prior to the Republican National Convention, there was an assassination attempt on former President Trump. How did that affect that event itself, and then Donald Trump's reaction to it affect voter perception of Donald Trump?
Well, I've been telling my friends he looked like Mel Gibson in Braveheart. I mean, I think it was probably the single biggest factor that put, his trajectory on the upswing. I mean, don't take my word for it. What did Mark Zuckerberg say? It was the all-time badass moment he ever saw. Now, he's not a Trump fan, but I think the contrast that you would see on TV was striking. This guy with his fist in the air, having dodged a bullet or being grazed by a bullet, doing what he did, and President Biden slinking away, barely getting up the steps on Air Force One to go to isolation in Delaware. So that was, to the extent the debate was the start of a losing streak of 3 weeks for the Democrats, that was the winning streak for a couple of weeks for the Republicans.
TJ, could you comment a little bit on that as well?
Yeah, no, it was horrific. The assassination attempt on the life of anybody, is abhorrent. It's antithetical. It's undemocratic. It is not what we are all about. So immediately was very, very gratified for two things. Number one, that the president was safe. I'm so sorry for the loss of the firefighter, or the chief rather. And my friend Selena Zito was right on the other side of that podium. It was a disaster all the way around. It's not about people I know in the crowd. It's about what happened, and what happened should never happen.
Yeah.
I applaud Congressman Boyle for calling on the head of the Secret Service to step down in the wake of this. It seems unfathomable how something like that could have happened. They need to get to the bottom of it, and heads do. And I think people need to be held accountable for the roles that they might have played in all of that. Beyond that, I never thought in my world that I would have something in common with Mark Zuckerberg. I wear shirts with collars, and I wear long pants that aren't jeans and stuff. But I said the same thing. When I saw him get up, the former president get up and raise his fist and yell, "Fight, fight, fight," with the flag in the background. I said out loud, he might not be my particular cup of tea, but that was exactly the most badass thing I've ever seen a politician do. It was an amazing reaction. So I'm glad we're all very grateful that he didn't suffer a more profound injury. Sorry, hearts bleed for those who did. And as far as Mark Zuckerberg goes, this is one time, 100% have to agree with him. That was iconic.
I'd like to shift our focus once again. Alan, you'd referred to the Republican National Convention, which occurred roughly about a week ago. Did that accomplish its mission of firing up its base?
Well, I think, yeah. I think for me, the takeaways were this looked like a working person's party more than it looked like a country club Republican party. And I will tell you, behind the scenes in 2000 and 2004, we were always concerned about how we looked and did we connect when the cameras were on our delegations to the rest of the country. So I like the fact that this looks like, middle America type of audience, people in diners, people in restaurants, people in VFWs. That's the people on work assembly lines and construction sites. That's what you saw. I like Nikki Haley, and particularly Nikki Haley's speech, because I think you always want the most tenacious opponent of your candidate to, issue the call for unity. And I think she set him up well. I don't know that he took that setup and drove it home in his speech. He didn't, actually, in my opinion. And then I like the everyday working, the average American, the people had real stories to tell, not the politicians that tell stories, but the people that had their stories to tell. So I thought it was a great convention. I really did. I mean, the people that planned that, maybe one or two too many Trumps, at the podium, but that's nitpicking on my part. But I thought it was a really good convention, and better than any one that I ever participated in.
Perhaps notable, on Monday night of the convention, a member of the Teamsters Union spoke. What does that say about the party's outreach?
Working, we're trying to become the party of working middle class people. We really are. I think open, I want to believe we can get to Big Ten. We always say it. I want to believe we can get there. But I think it was a bold move. I mean, because I know there were Republicans squirming. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce folks were squirming. But it's Trump's base. Frankly, it's probably the group up for grabs in this election. The people that don't listen to what their leader says, but are going to vote for what their family says. And I like the whole thing.
TJ, what was your take on the fact that there was union representation at the Republican National Convention?
Well, I absolutely agree with Alan in the sense that, under Trump, the Republican Party has branded itself far more toward, or the things that he speaks to seem to resonate with people who fit that working class description. Number one. Number two, and again, I don't mean to be too pointy-headed, but there's a general disdain for institutions writ large in our state and in our nation, whether it be medicine, whether it be education, and I think to some level it pertains to organized labor as well. The days of being able to control the vote, so to speak, and I use that endearingly, are long since past. And I think it shows itself in folks who fit that description, who might be part, or in this case, part of the Teamsters Union, gravitating politically in a different direction. Number one, maybe it speaks to our inadequacy in speaking to their needs in ways that make better sense to them. But I think that it's like a bubble. It's almost like a balloon, Francine. You one end, you squeeze it, and the other. So where we've suffered losses, we've made tremendous gains. The question will be whether or not we can mobilize. I agree with Alan. This election is going to come down to a literal handful of folks in a handful of states. But why intensity matters, it makes it easier. It helps, critical mass helps convince people that they want to see enthusiasm. You don't want to go to a restaurant. You're going to wait online to go to a restaurant. You see some place where nobody's eating there. You're going to think something's wrong with it. So same thing in politics. You want to go where all the cool kids are. And now that, it's kind of cool, it was uncool, as Alan said, for about 3 weeks not to be a Democrat. Now it's cool again. So, having the Teamster there isn't going to undo that apple cart in any profound or real specific way.
How do you think Donald Trump has changed the Republican Party over the last decade?
TJ just said it. He's reached out to the working class probably more effectively than any Republican candidate or president than Ronald Reagan. I think it's going to kill me because I love Ronald Reagan, so I'm not. That part of Trump is Reagan-esque. The part at the podium is not Reagan-esque, but that part of Trump is Reagan-esque, which is reach out to working class people and connect to people who are worried about their budget, who are worried about making the choice between, can you do a vacation this year? Can you go to the supermarket? Can you fill the tank up, or you only go for half a tank and then wait a couple of days and fill the tank again halfway? I mean, that message is a message he does well. The strength in foreign policy is a message that he does pretty well. And I think so I think that's the change. The change is, the country club Republicans are uneasy with him, but average people aren't. Average people are flocking to him, but not enough to say this thing's over. Not at all.
Last week during the convention, Donald Trump announced Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate. What should viewers know about J.D. Vance?
Well, I read Hillbilly Elegy twice. I thought it was a wonderful book. So, the conventional wisdom is he's going to connect to Rust Belt people in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, because he's going to understand that having lived that life, having come from a family in a working class town that has seen its better days, he's going to understand that feeling, which was the Trump victory key in 2016, when in Erie flipped the way it flipped, and when Hazleton and Luzerne County flipped the way it flipped between support for President Obama and support for Donald Trump. That was it. You take those two counties, those two towns, and that's, working class and manufacturing towns that it felt left behind. Same over in Ohio. So, some of that's still there. That's the basis of Trump's appeal. But I think for him to win security and the world situation, he has to win that argument for him to win, because he's got the other. That's his base. But he's got to win that argument. You're better off with me because America will be better off with me on the world stage, and you're going to be safer with me, and I'll fix the economy. He's just got to make it that simple and talk about what he's going to do, not what he did. Everybody knows the contrast between the 4 years he was there and the 4 years plus, or 3+ years of the current administration. He's got to sell people back to the idea that don't look back, understand what that was. You all know, you lived it. Here's what I'm going to do. And he's got to make that argument.
Do you think the assassination attempt influenced Donald Trump's decision for second in command?
You say that again?
Do you think the assassination attempt influenced Donald Trump's decision for who he selected for second in command?
I don't. I think he was always leaning toward Vance. I think the argument, Vance gave him the youth contrast. Vance gave him the blue wall strategy, the Rust Belt state strategy. And Vance is really close to Donald Jr.
Let's shift our focus on the other side of the ticket now. Governor Josh Shapiro is being named as being considered as a potential running mate for Kamala Harris. What would a Shapiro-Harris ticket bring to Pennsylvania?
It would bring a whole lot, obviously. Josh is an amazingly gifted public servant. He's as solid as a rock when it comes to the legislative side or the administrative side of whatever he's done. When he was AG, he ran a high and tight office. When he was in the state legislature, I can attest to the fact that he was always incredibly well prepared. And that's transcended into the job he's done as governor. He is also a very, very gifted communicator. He can disseminate a message. He is very relatable. He's young. It really drives home the notion that Donald Trump is in his own right a very, very older fellow. So it brings kind of I was trying to think back on things that could be like relatable in our lifetimes. And in my lifetime, I think when Bill Clinton, a very young man, picked Al Gore, it was thought of, typically when you think of a president, vice president, you look for some sort of, people conventionally think you look for some sort of balance. You look for something, because I will concede, very few people vote. Nobody cares who the vice president is when they go to vote. They care about, it's a choice between those. All the other things that you can fill in, swing state, popular, wildly popular governor, with credentials in a Republican-controlled legislature. Josh has all of that. And for that reason, I think he is amazingly well positioned, suited, and qualified. There's another person that you can say almost the exact same things about, but he's just he's older, and that's Roy Cooper in North Carolina. I think these two governors are amazing. I wouldn't suggest we take the nice fellow from Arizona out of the United States Senate. Those seats are like hen's teeth. We probably want to hold on to them as long as we can. And the nice gentleman, Bashir from Kentucky, has done an amazing job as a Democrat in Kentucky. But I think Josh Shapiro and to an extent Roy Cooper would be phenomenal choices. With Cooper, you also theoretically put North Carolina, which was in play, then it wasn't in play. It definitely is in play again, especially if you added that dynamic. But Josh can go anywhere, say anything, and be well received by virtually any audience. And that's hugely important.
I'd like to talk about issues for a moment. In 2022, the Dobbs decision was credited or blamed with significantly helping Democratic Party in the election. Do you anticipate that abortion will remain a big issue this year?
100%. Oh, I'm sorry. But
no,
yes,
go ahead, TJ.
It was directed to me, of course. And who better a messenger than potentially the first female president in the nation's history to speak to just how incredibly important it is that we have a court that is mindful of such things in term when it comes to a woman's right to reproductive freedom. So yeah, the abortion issue will very, very, very much be on the issue in 2020.
Yeah,
Or on the ballot in 2020.
the way I see it, it's back in play. I think it was huge in the last election. I really do, because the shock of the decision without seeing, all right, well, I think Trump is actually handling that issue really well. I don't know if they're communicating it effectively enough, which is it's up to the states now. And what I saw behind the scenes, I wasn't there, but I talked to people who were. The way the Republican National Committee or convention handled the thing that used to drive us nuts all the time, the platform committee. They shrunk that thing down real simple, basically said, abortion's now up to the states, and what plays in Minnesota may not play in California. What plays in California may not play in Texas or Ohio. That's the best way a Republican can handle that. That is the best way a Republican and they got that through and didn't lose the social conservatives and the people that think about right to life primarily. They didn't lose them. So that's a success. I think for people that are stressed by inflation, by the economy, or scared in their communities, abortion ranks underneath those issues. To the extent that there are people that aren't troubled by that, they tend to be people where abortion and the environment rank higher. So that's part of that dynamic that'll play out among that very few group of voters that TJ and I talk about. They're going to decide this election in swing states.
Alan, there's been attention on the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. For those that aren't familiar, can you explain what should they know about it? What is it?
Well, I don't know about it. I know it's being used a lot. I haven't read it. And I tend to disregard think tank stuff anyway. So regardless, left, right, I did Republican, Democrat. I just tend to, people who are in think tanks get paid to do things that make the think tank higher ups feel good, or their donors to the think tank feel good. So I disregard that stuff. But I know it's going to be thrown around out there, and it's going to be thrown out as a scare mechanism. I'll probably read it to find out. But I think Trump and Vance ought to say, well, that's what these people think. That's not what we're going to do.
TJ, can you comment on Project 2025 and how it may be utilized within this election cycle?
So there's lots of things about Project 2025, including the fact that absolutely very few people in the country believe Donald Trump, period. But when he talks about Project 2025 and says that he doesn't know who these people are, more than half of the people on the board that created this work product worked for him in some capacity. He knows them very well. Think of Project 2025 as making America the Stone Ages again. Some of the things that are contained in this document are beyond the pale. And you can say, well, it doesn't matter. It's just a think tank. But here's the overarching problem. Donald Trump, when he was president the last time, ran through just about every good person you can think of. I think of a guy like Rex Tillerson. He was an international diplomat. He had the world was his oyster, and Donald Trump made a mouse out of him. I think of people like not Tillerson, but Mattis and Kelly, these generals that we should all be so proud of. And Trump belittled them and defamed them and disparaged them. Tony Fauci, a guy who's given his life to medicine. So what he's left with is exactly the bottom of the barrel. So what makes Project 2025 so scary, aside from all the words on the pages, is the people that could actually implement crazy things. And I encourage everybody to go in and read it. Lots of these crazy things, you can say, well, that doesn't have a chance. That could never happen. In a Trump administration that's populated with the bottom of the barrel, things like this could happen. So it is important that we pay attention. And nobody believes him when he says he has no idea who these people are, where they come from. In some cases, they came from the office down the hall.
TJ, the Democratic National Convention is scheduled less than a month away. What needs to happen between now and then?
More of what we've seen in the last 24 hours and less of what we saw leading up to that. We need more enthusiasm. See, enthusiasm begets enthusiasm. So I think what you'll probably see are spikes in people wanting to get on the phone and talk to voters, make sure they get out and vote, identify them, make sure we know who they are, when they got to vote, make sure they have a vote plan. All of those mechanical things that are necessary or critical to a winning campaign are much easier accomplished when you have, people excited about it. So leading up to the convention, it should be that. We should have I think at this moment in time, we are on a trajectory to have a very harmonious convention. I agree with Alan. The Republicans, up until like the last 95 minutes, did an amazing job. It was when the former president went off the teleprompter and started riffing, is when the wheels fell off the bicycle. But I think we'll have from start to finish a good display. We will be able to drill down now that all of the cacophony about all of the machinations about it are behind us now. We can talk about issues and what are the things that actually differentiate Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
There's a pretty smart senior political correspondent on Fox that I respect whenever he opens his mouth, Brit Hume. And Brit Hume said, the advantage the Democrats have if they get the sitting president problem behind them is they now know what mark they have to achieve, having watched the Republican convention. So they know unity now becomes important because that's what the Republican convention did. They know showing people positive, people confident, people having fun. Because I saw a lot of people having fun on the floor of the Republican convention, and Republicans didn't have a lot of fun on the floor of conventions. They had fun after the cameras went off and we went to the parties. So I think getting ready to go into a convention, but knowing the mark you have to meet or beat. And I think that's an opportunity for the Democrats right now.
What advice would either of you give both either the Trump campaign or the presumptive Harris campaign now that they're facing perhaps what was an unanticipated opponent with roughly 3.5 months to the election?
My advice to the Trump-Vance team is focus on what you're going to do and make sure you communicate that very well and connect to as many people as possible and stop the grievances and stop the grandstanding about what you did. We all know our life was better 4 years ago than it is now when you look at the economy. Start selling what you're going to do, close the deal on what you're going to do, and make that acceptable.
Ed Rendell wrote the book on how to run statewide in Pennsylvania, whether you're running for state treasurer, auditor general, whatever, or president of the United States. I would think that the vice president would be well served if she announced her choices of running maybe sooner, much sooner rather than later, because I think time is of the essence. I think that person, that man or woman, Josh Shapiro, should be able to go out and start engaging with voters with whom we have an issue, especially voters in areas like Josh has somebody like Josh has a very compelling story to be told in places like southwestern Pennsylvania, where they haven't heard a Democratic story told credibly in a long time. So I would think and hope that, while the nominee, the vice president, is going around to the cities and flying around in the airplane, I'd send the vice president out in a car and go to places in Pennsylvania that aren't really used to seeing people running for vice president. And I'd speak the language and speak to people directly, and that's how I would spend my time is in this state. And that roadmap is like you can transplant it to any state in the nation.
If that were the matchup, Governor Shapiro and Senator Vance, those are two really smart people, two really smart, articulate people that really talk to everyday people very, very effectively. I'm fascinated by that if that's what happens.
Both following the assassination attempt as well as following President Biden's withdrawal announcement, both parties have called for unity. Do you think that sentiment lasts between now and November?
Oh, it's over. I don't think it's happening now. That's what you have to say for 48 hours to get through the news cycle. That's over. This is about winning. This is about getting away with what the referees won't call or won't say.
Our guests have
Yeah,
been Our guests have been
My
Alan
better
Novak
aid-
and TJ Rooney. They both represent the Rooney Novak Isenhour Group. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you very
My
much.
pleasure. Thank you all. It's great to be with everyone here.